In the name of Allah, the most merciful, the most beneficent. So, as we have discussed the basic structure and function of the cell membrane and other other membranes in the cell in the previous two lectures, now from here on in the lecture 3 and 4, we will discuss that how it is implicated in the clinics, that what are the problems which can occur with the lipids and the proteins in the cell membrane, and then how it can cause disease, and what are the possible treatments for that. Cystic fibrosis. Cystic fibrosis is caused by a defect in a single transmembrane protein, cystic fibrosis transmembrane conductance regulator, which is also called as CFTR. As seen in the figure, this regulator is a chloride ion channel that crosses through the plasma membrane, that is, it is an integral protein in the cell membrane. This channel is specifically active in the epithelial tissues, where it normally helps produce thin mucus via the movement of the water. When mutated, or if there is a problem or mutation, this can lead to the production of abnormal protein and abnormal channel, and channel does not work properly. That is, it does not allow the chloride ions to pass through it, and so water can also not pass to the canaliculi. So in turn, this leads to directly to many of the symptoms of the cystic fibrosis, which is thick, sticky mucus, frequent, frequent chest infections, coughing, and shortness of breath. Cystic fibrosis is a genetic disease that mainly affects the lungs and digestive system, but it can result in fatal complications such as liver disease and diabetes. The defective gene responsible for the cystic fibrosis leads to the creation of thicker, stickier mucus, which is unusual, and cough can develop with that. This makes breathing difficult as well, and it leads to severe lung infections and pneumonia. The mucus also interfere with the pancreatic function by preventing the enzymes from properly breaking down the food. That is actually the flow of the enzymes from the pancreatic acini through the canaliculi to the duodenum. The digestive problems, they result in potentially leading to malnutrition. That is, if the fats they are not digested, or other food that is not digested, vitamins and nutrients they are not liberated from the food and not absorbed, and one suffers from malnutrition. This thickening of the mucus can also cause the male infertility by blocking the vas deferens, that is the movement of the sperm and the passage, or the tube that carries the sperm from the testis to the urethra. So the result can be infertility. Cystic fibrosis is a serious, potentially life-threatening disease, and most common cause of death in the people is respiratory failure. So this is how we see that a small problem or even a single mutation in a single protein in a cell membrane can cause a havoc to the human health. So the common symptoms seen in the cystic fibrosis are salty tasting skin, persistent coughing, shortness of breath, wheezing, poor weight gain in spite of the excessive appetite, greasy and bulky stools, and nasal polyps are small fleshy growths found in the nose in some cases. Liddle syndrome is another example of the problem with the cell membrane proteins. Here there is a problem with the sodium channel degradation system in the kidney, and more sodium channels they remain in the tubule even in the older ones. As a result, more sodium is reabsorbed and more potassium is lost in the kidneys, and this effect mimics the primary hyperaldosteronism like effect. This leads to hypertension in the childhood. So there may be metabolic alkalosis and low potassium levels in this case. Uh, Excess reabsorption of sodium and potassium and loss of potassium from the renal tubule is treated With a combination of low sodium diet and potassium sparing diuretics, especially amiloride, it is extremely rare. And the other potassium sparing diuretic, which is spironolactone, that doesn't work in this case. The general signs and symptoms are the presentation of the children with frequently asymptomatic the frequently asymptomatic, but there may be hypertension in these cases. So if the children are presenting with hypertension that is not responding to the antihypertensive medication, one chance is that there may be Liddle syndrome. Adults can present with the other symptoms, for example, hypokalemia and weakness, fatigue and palpitations and muscular weakness, even shortness of breath, constipation, abdominal distension. Such things can be the presenting complaints in that case, and only after the proper investigation we can find out the basic cause, which is a problem with the membrane protein. So in this diagram you can see on the left side it is the normal renal tubule. Here the normal cells are present, principal cell and integrated cell with normal membrane proteins. One of the protein is sodium potassium pump that is working normally, and that helps absorb the sodium back and gives out the potassium into the lumen. And in the intercalated cells we can see that to balance out, the chloride comes out into the interstitium, and when it is taken back, instead one bicarbonate is given out, and that bicarbonate was derived from uh, carbonic acid, which came into being from carbon dioxide and water. And as we derived bicarbonate, one H was produced, and that is also given into the lumen to get rid of the acid from the body and replenish the bicarbonate into the human body. But in the Liddle syndrome, what happens is that there is some sort of defect in the sodium channels in the luminal membrane, and that actually the problem is that the degradative mechanism is not working. As the sodium or potassium or whatever channels are there in the cell membrane, these proteins they get older. There is a system which can destroy the older proteins, and then the new proteins come into play on the surface of the cell. But in this case, that mechanism is not working well due to some mutation in the uh, in the genes which are coding those protein degradative systems. We see that the sodium channels, even the older ones, they remain in the surface as these channels are more in number. So the more sodium is reabsorbed, the more potassium is given out, and similarly, more H are excreted and more bicarbonate is generated. So net effect would be the retention of the sodium, and then osmotically retention of the water, loss of the potassium, and uh, the retention of more bicarbonate. So alkalosis and hypernatremia and hypokalemia are the major consequences of the changes due to Liddle syndrome. Long QT syndrome is another syndrome which is associated with problem or defect with the potassium channels in the heart. There are different types of this, and the major cause is genetic mutation, and even genetic mutations may be of different types. One of the most common affects the potassium channels, and when they are defective, there is a problem with the repolarization after the depolarization of the heart, and that can lead to arrhythmias, fainting, drowsiness, seizures, and even the sudden death. So, if there is a family history of sudden death, then one possibility is that the person is inheriting the long QT syndrome affected genes, and that person may be at a risk of sudden cardiac death. Otherwise, there may be no problems or no signs or symptoms shown by the individual. So if there is a mutation in the SCN4A gene that codes for the sodium channels, that may lead to hyperkalemic periodic paralysis. And in this disease, there is hyperkalemia which happens in episodes, and during the episodes, there are certain symptoms, for example, extreme muscle weakness and increase of potassium levels in the blood, Muscle weakness during the attack usually affect the arms and the legs, muscles of the eyes, throat, and trunk. Most often, these episodes involve a temporary inability to move muscles in the arms and legs. Usually, the episode that lasts for 15 minutes, but it can go up to a day or even a week long. Myotonia congenita is another disease which is due to a defect in the CLCN1 gene, and that gene encodes chloride channel. If that is faulty, it can affect the swallowing process, causes difficulty in swallowing, gagging, stiff movements that improve when they are repeated because the initiated movement, which is voluntary, that is smooth, but then the relaxation process is slow, so that causes the stiffness. Frequent falling would be reported, and difficulties in opening the eyelids after strenuous contraction or crying are the hallmark of the disease. Thank you so much for patient listening.